Once the most feared man in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte spent his final days not in glory, but in isolation, a prisoner on a remote island in the Atlantic. The conqueror of empires died alone, powerless, ill, and shrouded in mystery. Was it disease that took him, or something more sinister? In his prime, Napoleon commanded millions, redrew borders, and crowned himself emperor. But in the end, he was stripped of everything, his titles, his armies, his freedom. On the desolate island of St. Helena, far from the battlefields that made him legendary, he faced his greatest enemy, time. The silence of exile was deafening. Gone were the roars of cannons and cheering crowds, replaced by the creaking of wooden floors and the watchful eyes of British guards. Confined in Longwood House, Napoleon's health crumbled, and so did his spirit. Historians still debate what truly ended his life. Some say cancer. Others whisper of poison, betrayal, and revenge. As new evidence emerges, old theories resurface, challenging what we thought we knew. This is the haunting story of the emperor's final chapter, of regret, mystery, and a legacy that refused to die. Welcome to Napoleon's final days. Napoleon Bonaparte, once crowned emperor of the French, reshaped Europe through war and ambition. But after his defeat at Waterloo in 1815, he was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena. There, stripped of his power, he spent the last 6 years of his life in isolation. Cut off from the world, Napoleon lived under strict British supervision. He was constantly monitored by Governor Sir Hudson Lowe, a man he deeply resented. Communication was limited, and even his letters were censored. The once great emperor was now a guarded prisoner with no escape in sight. His health gradually declined, though the exact cause remains uncertain. He complained of stomach pain, fatigue, and depression. Despite medical attention, his condition worsened with each passing year. Was it a natural illness, or were darker forces involved in his suffering and slow death? To this day, historians question the circumstances of his death. Some believe it was cancer, others point to deliberate arsenic poisoning. The mystery endures. Unraveling the truth requires a closer look into his final moments, the environment around him, and those who were closest during the end. Napoleon's rise was meteoric. Born in Corsica in 1769, he rose from obscurity to command revolutionary France. Through bold strategy and relentless ambition, he crowned himself emperor in 1804. For years, he dominated Europe, defeating coalitions and redrawing borders to suit his vision of a modern empire ruled by order. The tide began to shift during his ill-fated invasion of Russia in 1812. Though he reached Moscow, the brutal winter, scorched earth tactics, and logistical collapse devastated his army. Of the 600,000 soldiers who marched in, fewer than 100,000 survived the retreat. It marked the beginning of Napoleon's long decline. The coalition powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, sensed his vulnerability. At the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, also called the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered a catastrophic defeat. One of the largest battles in European history, it shattered his dominance and forced him back toward French soil. In 1814, he was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. Surprisingly, he escaped less than a year later and returned to France in what became known as the 100 Days. The people rallied, the monarchy fled, and Europe prepared for war once again. His dramatic comeback ended at Waterloo in June 1815. Facing British and Prussian forces under Wellington and Blücher, Napoleon gambled on bold tactics, but miscommunication, bad weather, and sheer numbers overwhelmed him. His final defeat marked the end of an era that had reshaped Europe for over a decade. After Waterloo, the Allies decided he must never return. Napoleon surrendered to the British, hoping for asylum. Instead, they sent him far away, to the isolated South Atlantic island of St. Helena. There, guarded and surrounded by ocean, he was cut off from allies and escape. St. Helena was no ordinary prison. Rugged, windswept, and controlled entirely by the British, it offered no means of contact with the outside world. Napoleon was confined to Longwood House, cold, damp, and far removed from the palaces he once ruled. Surveillance was constant and often humiliating. Governor Sir Hudson Lowe, tasked with keeping Napoleon in check, enforced harsh restrictions. He limited visitors, monitored correspondence, and clashed frequently with his prisoner. Napoleon despised him, describing Low as petty and cruel. Their bitter relationship defined his daily existence in captivity and deepened his sense of betrayal. In exile, Napoleon tried to shape his legacy. He dictated memoirs, analyzed past campaigns, and planned how history would remember him. But even as he wrote, illness crept in. Surrounded by loyalists but haunted by defeat, his body and spirit gradually declined, setting the stage for a tragic final chapter. By 1818, 3 years into exile, Napoleon's health began visibly deteriorating. He often complained of abdominal pain, nausea, chills, and fatigue. British doctors prescribed mild treatments, but his condition worsened. His once sharp mind dulled, and his mood darkened. The vibrant emperor had become a pale shadow of himself. Longwood House offered no comfort. Cold wind seeped through broken windows. Damp walls bred mold. The food was poor, and sanitation was worse. Napoleon, used to palaces and feasts, now ate under surveillance, surrounded by rusted furnishings and peeling paint. Each day was a reminder of how far he had fallen. He remained defiant. Despite illness, he wrote constantly, dictating memoirs to loyal aides like Count Bertrand and Montholon. These writings painted him as a misunderstood visionary, slandered by enemies. Every word was part of his plan to control the narrative, to outlive defeat through history. Governor Hudson Lowe continued to enforce rigid restrictions. Napoleon was denied certain books, blocked from meeting new people, and subjected to harsh inspections. The emperor believed these conditions were not just humiliating, but intentionally designed to kill him slowly. His hatred for Lowe became obsession. In early 1821, his symptoms worsened. He could barely walk, spoke less, and refused most food. His abdomen swelled, and he vomited frequently. Doctors debated the cause, gastritis, ulcers, liver issues, but their methods were limited. Even basic medications were often denied or delayed under strict British protocol. Napoleon began preparing for death. He dictated his will, expressing deep love for France and bitter resentment toward England. He asked to be buried on the banks of the Seine, near the people he once ruled. His loyal companions stayed close, recording his final thoughts and prayers. On May 5, 1821, after days of suffering and drifting in and out of consciousness, Napoleon Bonaparte died. Witnesses reported his final words, "France, the army, head of the army," a whisper of his former identity. He was 51 years old. The British conducted an autopsy. The official report listed stomach cancer as the cause of death. However, inconsistencies in the records and the unusual presence of arsenic in hair samples discovered decades later gave rise to suspicion of poisoning, possibly by design or through contaminated materials. Theories flourished. Was it slow poisoning by the British? A rogue servant's betrayal? Or merely natural decay accelerated by stress and confinement? With no clear consensus, Napoleon's death became a mystery that outlived him, a riddle historians still chase, buried beneath politics, science, and imperial memory. Napoleon's death didn't silence his influence, it ignited it. His fall became a legend, inspiring generations of thinkers, leaders, and revolutionaries. In France, his memory evolved from that of a controversial tyrant to a symbol of national pride. Death, ironically, made his myth stronger than ever. The official report of stomach cancer remained accepted for decades. Yet, modern forensic analysis of preserved hair strands revealed unusual arsenic levels, sparking renewed debate. Was it environmental? Was he slowly poisoned? The lack of solid evidence has kept historians and scientists divided even 200 years later. Many point to environmental sources, arsenic-laced wallpaper or contaminated wine. Others believe it was intentional, a political act of slow assassination. If true, who was responsible? The British? A servant? A disillusioned follower? Theories multiply, but no definitive culprit has been proven. The man who shaped empires died alone, but his ideas endured. Military academies still study his campaigns. Political movements, both liberal and authoritarian, cite his legacy. In many ways, Napoleon helped invent modern statecraft, centralized power, nationalism, and the use of image to control memory. His reburial in Paris in 1840 was monumental. France, once torn by his wars, now honored him. Tens of thousands gathered as his remains returned from St. Helena. The Arc de Triomphe, which he commissioned, loomed over his procession, an emperor welcomed home in death. Today, Napoleon's tomb lies under the golden dome of Les Invalides in Paris. Visitors from around the world stand in silence before the red sarcophagus. Some come to admire a military genius. Others question the cost of his ambition. Few leave untouched by his story. His final days reflect more than a man's death, they mirror the fall of unchecked ambition. Napoleon's exile showed the limits of empire and the consequences of power. Yet it also highlighted human endurance, the fight to be remembered, to leave a legacy despite defeat. In today's world, debates over power, memory, and leadership echo Napoleon's life. Was he a hero or a tyrant? A visionary or a warmonger? These questions still define how we write and rewrite history, and how we judge those who seek greatness. Napoleon's end was tragic, but not forgotten. His story forces us to confront the thin line between glory and downfall. He shaped a continent, and still shapes how we remember power, legacy, and the final silence that comes for even the greatest of men. From emperor to exile, Napoleon's journey ended far from the throne he once claimed. His final days were a tragic blend of illness, isolation, and unanswered questions. On the desolate island of St. Helena, stripped of power and watched by enemies, he faded into history, yet his shadow never truly vanished. Though official records claimed stomach cancer, whispers of arsenic poisoning, political silencing, and foul play still stir debate. His autopsy raised more questions than it answered. Even in death, Napoleon remained an enigma, his demise as complex and controversial as his life. Over a century later, his remains were brought back to France in a grand ceremony. From a forgotten prisoner to a celebrated national hero, Napoleon's legacy was reclaimed. Today, millions visit his tomb in Paris, drawn not only by what he achieved, but by the mystery of how it all ended. So what do you believe happened during Napoleon's final days? Was he simply a fallen emperor succumbing to time, or the victim of a quiet assassination? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you learned something new. Subscribe to The Forgotten Past for more untold stories that history tried to bury. Hit the bell icon, because sometimes, the past whispers louder than the present.